Welcome to the New Quantum Era, the podcast dedicated to having conversations with the people working at the forefront of quantum information science and technology. I'm sorry for the delay since the last episode. This conversation was also recorded at APS in April, but I ran out of time to record the introduction before I had to take a little trip. Last week, I was on the island of Helgoland at a conference organized by the Max Planck Institute and Yale University, celebrating the 100th anniversary of Heisenberg's work on the uncertainty principle on that little island in the North Sea. I was there with a small crew of extremely hardworking and talented people shooting a documentary. It was an incredible experience, and I will have more about it to share with you all soon. On this, the 52nd episode, I'll be talking with my friend Emily Edwards, a physicist and professor at Duke University. I met Emily when I was at IBM Quantum through her efforts with her co-PIs to launch the Q12 initiative. This NSF-funded project, led by Emily and her colleagues Chandralekha Singh and Diana Franklin, works to collect and create educational resources for middle school through early college level students, as well as resources for parents and teachers. Emily believes really passionately in the importance of STEM education, starting as early as possible. And Q12 has done some incredible things to help teachers and parents who share that belief. They helped start World Quantum Day, which falls on April 14th every year because 4.14 is a rounded off version of Planck's constant. Events and activities are planned for each World Quantum Day that are educational, fun, and engaging, and the event has been steadily gaining traction every year. Q12 has also designed science kits that they ship out to classrooms for teachers who want to lead their students through projects that teach fundamental concepts about quantum physics. They have games on their site, an atlas of quantum concepts, and a ton of other really valuable resources. If we are entering a new quantum era, as this podcast certainly believes, we can expect a steady increase in demand from both the public and private sector for increasingly sophisticated quantum-related skills. And organizations like Q12 are helping develop the future workforce that all the tech giants will be needing. They also have a deeply held belief in the need to provide equal access to educational resources so that we can hopefully enter into this new technological revolution with more gender and race equality than the previous one. Hello, Emily. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So I've known you for a number of years now. I met you first as one of the co-founders of the Q12 initiative, which is an NSF-funded effort to sort of gather, curate, and help people leverage resources for teaching quantum information, quantum science, starting in sort of middle school and up through high school and junior high, first year, undergraduate sort of level. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yes. So I've been consistently impressed with your ability to organize people, to bring people together, to get people to work on stuff. I think that in part you're really good at sort of creating the motivation to try to help with the get over the challenges around science communication in general, but quantum has some sort of unique challenges for communication and education. And I mean, how do you think about those challenges?
No, it's a really good question. So I'll start with the challenge of just communicating about the field. So, I think for a lot of people in the public, including students, including K-12 teachers, they're a big part of that. I think that quantum is something they may have encountered in their in pop culture, in movies,
sure,
or in just
Ant-Man.
Ant-Man, exactly. It's as if there's another realm of magic. We're here near Disney and mystery and that nobody can access. And I think that because it's not a part of science that we grab on directly,
right,
even though we see its effects all around us every single day.
Right.
I think it has this aura of mystery. And when there's an aura of mystery, sometimes that can create fear in learners, in the public. People don't like to feel vulnerable, like this is, they don't want to feel like they don't know something. And I think when people feel this way, this fear, then it has an additional challenge for communicating the abstract. It means people may not be receptive to learning about it. It's certainly not as fun as learning about, well, okay, I think it's fun. But what I mean, what I should say is it at a glance does not feel as fun as, say, kitty cats or even astrophysics. I always say black holes beat quantum every day because you look and the heavens are inspired and you feel that human connection to the bigger picture. Quantum just, we struggle with that, and that presents a challenge.
Well, and I mean, there's any number of classical sort of experiments you can imagine or even remember from your own middle school or high school kind of classes that are easily graspable, right? It's tangible, it's blocks or it's things on wheels or whatever. There's physical forces and interactions you can directly see. And as you said, everything quantum is only indirectly sort of experienced. So what's sort of, are there generic kind of approaches that you think work for that kind of, making the invisible visible in some way?
No, absolutely. It's another great question. So I will separate it into both the sort of informal learning where you're kind of going out on your own. You might go to an outreach event or a science museum or something, or maybe even just look on a website and watch a YouTube video. Versus formal. So what I'll say let's start with the formal classroom, because that I think is key to the long term. I think the strategy and approach here is to think about or ask the question, what are the foundational parts of quantum that relate to science education, and how can we use quantum physics and quantum information science as a way for students to learn more about nature. And I think this part about being foundational, but also learning about nature is kind of the way in. And why I say that in the formal area is that students need the vocabulary.
Right.
They need to have the foundations in both science and then, physics and other areas to be able to start grappling and understanding this invisible. It doesn't mean that they need to know everything at once. It doesn't mean they can't even know it. I mean, there's lots of examples where students can start thinking about aspects of quantum phenomena at an early stage. But we have to, as a community, stop thinking we need to tell the whole story at once.
Right.
We need to remember how we learn about science. We learn slowly. Okay, I'm 45. I'm still learning.
Right.
So the story is not there for you to consume all at once.
Right.
And I think remembering this in the formal setting allows us to create then lesson modules that can build on each other. I'll pause there, and then maybe I'll switch to the sort of informal aspects.
Go for it. That makes total sense. But I think in part, probably there's more people in the audience who have informal opportunities to try to teach others about quantum information rather than teachers. So I'd love to hear about sort of the informal.
Right. So informal, I think there's a whole suite of opportunities for people to be content creators, if you will, and then also science ambassadors and quantum science ambassadors specifically. So one of the easy ways we can think about it is just show people the technology that we use to make this invisible world visible. So the other day I was given a brief talk about this. There are whole image archives that are available to the public to see scanning electron microscope images. Okay, scanning electron microscopes are based on quantum mechanics from the last century. They're used to see this unseen world at length scales even we got like 300 nanometers, but even down to a few angstroms, you
Right.
can start to begin to assemble images of what atoms look like in a crystal.
Right.
Okay, because I think for a lot of members of the general public, they don't realize that we can actually see atoms.
Yeah.
We can see them in a solid through scanning electron microscopes, and then we can also trap them
Right.
using electrodes, and then encode information in them.
Right.
And we have images of all of this.
Right.
And we have videos of all of it. And so you can start to sort of ignite people's imagination, I would say, similarly to the way we do it when we look into space.
Yeah.
Right? Because now you can start to see it and you're like, oh, that happens in a lab down the street from my house.
The twinkle of an ion in a trap is not that different from a twinkle of a star.
They look like stars
away.
to me, Sebastian. They truly do.
You mentioned content creators a couple of times. You've actually sort of created opportunities to try to help people with science communication in that kind of social media kind of content creation kind of context, right?
Like, have I made videos and
and also
art
helped, but also helped others on their own sort of process for how to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I am starting to teach science communication workshops,
Right.
and I'd like to turn it into a course. And so I am starting to teach these kind of skills about how you think about your goals as a scientist when you're communicating with the public, and how you can focus that effort, and importantly, who you should be working with. Because I think at least a lot of folks think they want to do it themselves. But really, we need to work with teachers, or you need to work with a museum, or maybe you are able to work with some artists, because these creative partnerships, they don't take something away from the content
Right.
creator. I think they, in fact, make it richer, and probably you'll discover that you have even more creativity when
Right.
you talk to these people.
Right.
So
I mean, I mentioned that just because I think it's a really valuable effort, because when I do see science communication, on YouTube videos and stuff, it's very hit or miss. There's a lot of stuff which is like just inaccurate right out of the gate, and it doesn't seem. I don't think it's necessarily intentional. I think it's because they haven't found those right sources of information and the right approach and potentially right partner, like you're saying.
yeah, and I mean, you make podcasts. It's a practice. It's a thing you have to work at.
No, mine are perfect all the time.
Yeah,
right from the
of course
start.
they are. You're the standard. But it is a practice, and something. I mean, I would say in my heart of hearts, I definitely consider myself somebody who's making stuff. So even though I'm happy to lead these consortia and try to advance quantum education at the different levels, it does bring me a great deal of joy to make the stuff
Right.
and then teach students, as I've begun to do in the last year or so, how to do
Right.
this.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did you have sort of educational training before you got into physics, or is this something you've sort of been attracted to over the years as your career has progressed?
Yeah, no, I've learned on the job.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So I've just been very fortunate in the timing of things that I'm in the position I'm at, I would say. It's a bit of luck. But I went to grad school to be a professor at a liberal arts college. I was motivated to do that because I had professors who were professors at liberal arts college, and they seemed like they were having a really great time. That seemed like a good job to me. So I went to grad school, and I did a postdoc, and then I took a hard pivot after my postdoc I took a position as a science communicator at the University of Maryland at the Joint Quantum Institute, and
Right.
I embarked on exploration there. I will say, while I didn't have formal training, I did have a mentor who was a professional writer and a former editor in the news business. And so he really guided me and so gave me that sort of on-the-job learning that I needed. And he told me then that you can't just be a good writer. You need to sort of be a Jack or Jill of all
Right.
media trade. And so that's why I've dabbled in a lot of it.
Right. You've done some visualizations of stuff as
Yes,
well. Yeah,
yes. And then I think the part that I work in K-12 education and what I've become really passionate about has been an opportunity that I've been able to work in science policy a little bit
Right.
on the, to try to figure out how we can under the National Quantum Initiative Act, how we can be better at bringing this to young learners and teachers, and really supporting teachers to do what works for their classrooms.
And what do you say? I mean, I think when I've brought up this topic with other people who are maybe less informed, I almost always get the reaction of like, really that young, like middle school? Is that, why do you think it's so important to sort of intercept the educational pathway that early with these concepts that are, invisible world and super non-intuitive and difficult to grasp?
Yeah, so it's, I'll say a couple of things. So first, non-intuitive is in the eye of the beholder, I would say. I think things are non-intuitive for us. In the U.S., we wait to talk about quantum mechanics until you're a physics major in your junior or senior year, where you're maybe you've already been like sort of entrenched in classical mechanics for a pretty long time at that point.
Your intuition is highly classical.
Your intuition is highly classical, and your education has been highly classical.
Right.
So I think there's an opportunity from a social science and an education standpoint to explore what it means to build intuition. But moreover, what I'll say is, for me, if we look at our goal, whether we think of it as a business or government or whatever it is, any goal you have in this area, you need to walk yourself back from that goal and say, well, what does it take? And for a while now, we've wanted to build a stronger quantum-ready workforce.
Right.
And one that doesn't leave anything on the table, and in the U.S., in order to not leave anything on the table, we need to make sure we're engaging populations from cities, from rural areas, from different backgrounds, boys, girls, what have you. But importantly, to work on that workforce, you have to start quite early. Students self-select out of science in middle school.
Right.
And then additionally, we need to build the stepping stones of foundational concepts in science, and quantum is part of that story. And students, if they get interested in this and engaged, what I think we see a lot of students, they get excited about just simple demonstrations of quantum mechanics at work. We get them excited, and then we're like, okay, that was great. See you in 10 or 15 years. And so I think, we're doing ourselves a disservice. If we all have seen the excitement in students when they're doing science demos at the early levels of K-5 middle school, then we're really doing ourselves a disservice to not harness that energy and not harness that quantum readiness. Yeah. They're ready.
Yeah.
We're the ones that aren't ready.
So do you think it's fair to say then that there's early sort of demos that are engaging as a first introduction, and it's fair to say there's pretty good introductory material that's sort of advanced high school or junior college or first year undergraduate sort of level. It's really that in between that there's sort of the least available content. Like, do we sort of abandon them after we generate that initial burst of interest?
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem. And in fact, even though there may be some content at high school and early stage 4-year institutions, it's not widely adopted. So most students in the U.S. do not see quantum information science at all. Period, in any of their education.
Right.
Now, they see quantum concepts of energy levels, atoms, probability. They see there's a lot of opportunities, particularly in the chemistry curricula. 70+% of students in the U.S. graduate having taken high school chemistry. Why aren't we telling them when they learn about energy levels that you can encode information into energy levels and do quantum information science?
Yeah.
Like, there's an opportunity there.
Yeah.
And if we had that would go a long way, I think. But at the middle school level, students aren't seeing that. At the elementary school level, they might only see it informally. Most students get, 1 to 3 hours of science education in elementary school a week. So there are lots of issues here that are not uniquely quantum. Now, what I'll say is important for quantum at that level is not just the content, of which I think we're beginning to scaffold and see and infuse into STEM education. It's the role models.
Right.
How did you get into this? To where you are,
totally
period.
Serendipitous, actually. Well, I guess initially computers was my entry point, and that definitely was role models. I mean, I was interested in what was going on in the early days of personal computing, early days of the internet, and that sort of brought me into the industry. Quantum, I just serendipitously fell into an IBM Think Summit at TJ Watson and
Right.
had my mind blown. But I mean, you're right. I mean, I think that if I'd had some of that exposure to the ideas of quantum information earlier, I would have found my way to it earlier as well.
Yeah, and students who say in middle school that they want to be in a science career are like 3 times as likely to end up in a science career than otherwise not. Now, what did I want to do? I wanted to be a teacher. So is it so surprising where I've landed?
No, it's not.
I think students know themselves better than we give them credit for. Now, we need to be ready for them. They're ready for quantum.
Right.
We need to be ready, and we need to be ready to provide role models for them so that they have a stepping stone there in the now while we're waiting for curricula to catch up.
And do you think, I mean, sometimes I think there's an interesting sort of character to this moment we're in where we're now sort of foundational quantum mechanics, quantum physics, quantum science, and technology, right? We're sort of transitioning into these more and more applied ways. You know, having a tech-savvy workforce has been a pretty familiar topic to industry for some time. Having a science-savvy workforce is not, right? I mean, I don't think that corporate America really understands the degree to which, they need to be thinking about this sort of scientific literacy so that we can have a workforce that can use these devices, use these technologies as we develop them. Is there an opportunity here, I guess is what I'm saying, to sort of, elevate the importance of science in general, because we're going to need not just technology literacy, but science literacy in the future workforce?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that.
Yeah, me too.
I believe that we need science savviness. I have to say, and I'd love to have pushback on this from some of these companies or have these discussions, it's not totally clear to me that that's a priority for a lot of companies. I know their workforce is the priority in a product development, and a lot of industry, they significantly invest in R&D and their investments, oscillate compared to the federal investments as a percent of GDP and all this other stuff. But I think that the connection that to succeed relies on science savviness has not sunk in. And I think because it hasn't necessarily affected the bottom line.
Right.
And so, it's not an indictment on these organizations that they haven't realized this. And now I think some organizations have foundation arms that are investing in STEM education through a philanthropic way. But I think when we have discussions about the science workforce, we're talking about way more people than the people that are in sort of S&T specific occupations. And I think up until now, the people in S&T specific occupations have been driving the tech industry, and then the tech industry has enough sufficient consumers and users who haven't necessarily needed to be science savvy to use the things, buy the things, go buy the latest, greatest.
Right.
But I think we are at an inflection point where people should be having this discussion because I do think there's a real risk in the current climate that we continue to think it's going to be this user economy. Right. And instead, I think, in the absence of more readiness and literacy and science, I think we're going to see a collapse of some of the progress that we've made.
Well, I mean, it just occurs to me that if we if we deliver on the promise of quantum computing at scale with a certain amount of fault tolerance, and you're starting to do effective simulation of natural systems, the industries that rely on chemical processes or novel materials for their end products, for those end users, are going to need a workforce that understand the possibility of being able to experiment with, designer materials for your car or your plane or whatever the end product is, right? And it feels like if you don't have that imagination that comes with the science literacy, then you are risking your competitor having that workforce. So you mentioned public sector or government spending. I mean, obviously, education is driven as a public good through public spending, but it does feel like the industry has a role in sort of adding to the urgency, right?
Yes.
Saying like, we really think this is important, and putting some degree of money where their mouth is to really underline how important that is for the federal government and state and local government as well, which are all stakeholders in education. I guess that the sort of most effective way you think forward to sort of elevate the mission for quantum information science in this sort of Q12 kind of context?
I mean, I do. The Q12 is a public-private partnership. It's funded mostly by the National Science Foundation and the Army Research Office through one of the national centers at the Laboratory for Physical Sciences. And it's been, I think we've had a lot of impact because there was nothing before, right? But at some point we are going to hit a wall, and I think it's coming, where we're 5 years in. We've had a lot of visible impact, but now the funding has fluctuated from the federal government. We have a lot of programs that are showing progress, but then they're going to stall out because they're in academia to support teachers, and they do rely on federal funding.
Right.
And I think if you don't have this blend of federal and private support, then whether, philanthropic and private sector companies, then I think it's just going to stall out. It's just going to be another hot topic area that people had dreams about.
Right.
I mean, computer science education has been working for over 2 decades to get into school. They've made tons of progress, and they're backed by substantial private money as well as federal money. There's a lot of NSF money in computer science education to make it equitable, but also to make it robust and to really just understand how we're using these tools. It's not just about, I think we hear a lot about equity, but really it is about the whole picture of what that means and how to make things so that all students have access to broadband, so that students can figure out how to use emerging tools like AI is part of the conversation now. I think if we're not doing at least as much as computer science, I think we've really missed out.
Right.
And I think this is hard for companies, and I understand why, because right now there's also not in quantum computing specifically, there's not yet a market.
A direct market, that's right.
There's not a direct market. It's largely R&D. And it's awesome, but it's largely R&D.
And R&D is a niche as far as a need from a workforce. You don't need a gigantic workforce for R&D. You need a bunch of very deep specialist people. But,
that's right.
Right. So that makes total sense. So then if somebody wants to either get involved in the sort of informal settings, or they're a company and they want to get involved in some way to support, what is the next step they take?
The next step should be to reach out directly. I'm happy to chat or a member of the larger Q12 partnership. What I've been trying to do recently is connect people to their local region. So if there's a teacher or a person listening who wants to spend some time developing material or just wants to know more about quantum education in general or how to talk to their local policymakers or school districts, whatever they need, we now have, I would say, enough of a movement in this area that there are people in nearly every state who we connect with. Right. And then additionally, I think if there's, I'm not going to say no to sponsors for education. Bring it on. We need to have that. And we will be, at a point where if we don't move in that model and have a blend of financial support, then quantum education and workforce development is really just going to collapse, truly. I don't mean to be so negative. It's just true. So
I don't
reach
think it'll
out.
come to that, but I think the risk is real. So it definitely takes action.
I think reach out so that we can think differently. And I'll finally say this, that computer science has done a lot of progress, but they had to do a lot of course correction because they waited too long. Both to have that big private investment, to have that big public investment, they waited too long.
Interesting.
And in fact, they've been trying to claw back gains they already had, say, in women. And if you're not having women working in your STEM field, then you're leaving people on the table. You're leaving talent behind.
That's right.
So they have a lot of talent that they're trying to claw back because they waited too long.
Right. Thank you very much, Emily, for joining me. And thank you for all of your efforts for Q12. I think it's really, really important. So.
Well, thank you, Sebastian. You were wonderful, and I appreciate your efforts and your partnership.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of the podcast, a production of the New Quantum Era, hosted by me, Sebastian Hassinger, with theme music by OCH. You can find past episodes on www.newquantumera.com or on Blue Sky at newquantumera.com. Thanks again to the support from APS for this episode, and thanks to Emily Edwards for a really enjoyable conversation. If you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and tell your quantum curious friends to give it a listen.